I am so excited to have a casual chat today with Sara, all about where we are in our magical practice, terms we use to define our magic, and most importantly, the forgotten women of magical history. I think this is going to be a fantastically engaging conversation. We will be getting into some of our personal experiences, advice, and touching on history. So, based on our previous conversations, also, I'm excited to get into Moina Mathers in particular.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a great casual episode. So for all of you viewers and listeners out there, you may want to put this on in the background as you're folding laundry or something. This will be a great chat to listen to. So there is no doubt many of our viewers and listeners remember who you are, Sara, but for our brand new folks, could you please reintroduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Sara Mastros. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I write and teach about magic and witchcraft and mythology and related topics. I also do like live in-person events. My next in-person event is Halloween weekend in Cromwell, Connecticut. I will be at Changing Times, Changing Worlds. And then I have ongoing like live stuff here in Pittsburgh. So if you're a witch or a magician of any stripe in Pittsburgh, like send me an email and we will talk. www.witchlessons.com is the easiest way to find all my stuff. Like you can get links to everything from there. If you want to email me, it's Sara, S-A-R-A, @witchlessons.com. You can actually also send it to Sara with an H, which is not my name, but I'm not an idiot, so that email comes to me too. Like people send it there, but that's not my name.
All right, perfect. And you write amazing books. Your classes are fantastic. So if anyone is looking to get into these subjects and looking for a great teacher, I highly recommend Sara. So
Oh, thank you. The new semester of classes, so for both the Introduction to Witchcraft and the Planetary Pentacles course, they both, the new semester starts at Halloween.
wonderful, thank you. And of course, all those links will be below in the description. If you're just listening away from your computer right now, no problem getting
Yeah,
those.
it's all down there. And I will also give you a coupon code for 10% off.
Awesome. So let's talk about the terms we use in our practice to describe ourselves. So how would you describe yourself?
So that's like a complicated question. It actually depends on the context in which I am asked. But usually I would say either witch or magician or sorceress. Um, it sort of depends on the context. For advertising, I will say I usually use witch. And my like preference for the word witch is entirely political. Like I think witch, relative to other terms like magician or sorcerer, does have a more like class conscious vibe to it, right? Like I think witches are traditionally in alliance with like marginalized peoples. And that is not to say like magicians and wizards by necessity are not, but like I think the word witch carries that connotation. And so that's like the primary reason why I prefer that word in sort of like public facing things. But I certainly would not deny that I am also a magician and an occultist and a sorceress, and also like some other like more specialized and like culturally bound around terms.
Yeah, and I think this is a fantastic conversation. One great one to start off with, because I've been thinking a lot about how people perceive labels through popular culture, through media, through their own real world experiences. And when I think about how I define myself, the term I prefer is magician. I've been, every time I've been initiated into an order. I've initiated several orders at this point. It's been as a magician. So I feel like that's the most accurate term to describe myself. But do I get labeled that? I don't. People call me a witch, and I think this is related to several things. The first being witches and witchcraft are much more prevalent in our general consciousness, whether it's movies, media, magazines.
Certainly lately, yeah. Like
Yes, absolutely.
It's a good time to be a witch.
It's a good time to be a witch.
Yeah.
And additionally, there is this connotation of it being femme folks, AFAB people, being witches. I mean, I'm trying to think of movies that portray witches. They're almost entirely women.
Yeah, and I don't know, like as a person who moves in like spaces with people who identify as witch, like actually many men, particularly cis straight men, either like some of them don't like being called a witch. Like my experience is that older men in particular do not care for the word witch, right? Whereas younger guys are like, no, I can be a dude and a witch, which like I am generally of that opinion. Like I do not understand any of those words to be inherently gendered, except like sorceress or sorcerer.
Sure.
Even sorceress. Like sorcerer, I would not understand as a gendered term, but sorceress, I would certainly call a male magician a sorceress if he wanted me to. But I would, like, that term, I guess, is gendered in English. But no, generally, I do not see any of those terms as gendered. But I think you are 100% correct that, like, women, especially like the femmier you are, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are more likely to get put into that, like, witch category. And certainly when I was coming up, like, because I did have a period where I was like working primarily like ceremonial magic, style OTO Golden Dawn magic. And like, I mean, I'm not the femmiest woman in the world, but I'm still definitely a woman. And like, at least when I was doing that, which was like the late 90s, it like that was an aggressively unwelcoming space for young women.
Yeah, fantastic point. And I guess when I reflect on my own self, I don't view witch as a bad word. So when I tell people to call me a magician, you know, I'm like, well, it's technically more accurate because I've never been initiated as a witch. I'm not in a coven. I don't practice what I would consider witchcraft. And those terms, when we talk about different terms of magic, I think it is also important to remember a lot of people define these things differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Thorn Mooney has a book coming out recently called Witches Among Us that gets a deep dive into that. So I'm excited to read that book. I'm getting my copy next month at her book launch. Little plug for Thorn's book. But yeah, these are different terms, but I think it's important at the end of the day to return back to the individual and have that conversation instead of labeling something, ask them what they want to be called.
Yeah, 100%. Like in this case about like witches and magicians, but also in every other case, like before you, like, you know what I mean? If you assign a label to a person, like do your best to take a guess. But if they tell you that you're wrong, just use what they told you to use, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely being mindful, essentially.
Right. Whereas I think it's like more complicated. Like when it's a person, I think that person has like the sole ability to label themselves even whatever they want, even if I think it's ridiculous. Right? Like, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes people claim titles that I'm like, I don't think you are that thing, actually. But like, I would not normally fight that person on it. Right? Like, sure. You're a wizard. Okay, whatever. Right? Like, but I think it's more complicated when we're talking about like the practice itself, right? Because for the individual people, like, I'm not gonna police how people call themselves. Like, that just seems like there's no winning in that argument, right? But like when we talk about different kinds of magic, I do think that like it's really valuable to like really think about like where those boundaries are and why we think of them that way. And like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think people can pick whatever. Like I said, my connection to the word witch is like primarily political rather than actually about what the differences are between witchcraft and magic and occultism and sorcery, which I would say I do all of those things.
Sure.
Like, sometimes some, sometimes the other, right? But I think like when we're talking about what those things are, I think that's a really like fascinating conversation. And I think it's moved a lot.
Yes.
Like I feel like the way people use words to describe different kinds of magic has shifted very rapidly in the like 20 some years I guess I've been doing this for like 30 years, but I feel like maybe 20 years that I've been like enmeshed in community enough to get a good sampling of how people use words, like very differently than they used to.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And you know, I think you brought up another interesting point here is about sort of when we talk about the magical community, I think attitudes towards women are evolving and changing, but there is a deep history, especially within the occult, esotericism, Western esotericism, ceremonial magic, you know, this area. There's a deep history of undervaluing and, quite frankly, erasing women and femme folks from contributions.
100%.
And so, speaking from the modern day, have you encountered any misconceptions about women and magic? And were you able to address them or have that discussion with the person at that time? Any examples you can think of?
So definitely yes. Although like all the stories I'm going to tell are like 20, almost 30 years old. God, I'm so old. Like, right. So I feel like it used to be much, much worse. But I also think that like I don't know how much of my impression that things have gotten much better is also possibly because one, I got older, right? And like
Sure.
young women definitely bear the brunt of that shit. And also like I got more famous. So like
Yeah.
I get less of that, but it definitely still happens. So let me explain like how it happened, how I see it happen today, which is something I would consider really minor. And then I'll talk about like the much more serious ways it used to happen, right? So just recently, I don't want to name any names, but like an expert on Solomonic magic, right, was being interviewed by somebody, and he was asked to name like some like, you know, modern people who are doing important work in Solomonic magic, right? He named 7 men, half of whom have not published anything in the last decade.
Wow.
And
That's
then
ignorant.
the interview pushed a little bit. And I think it's a little hard to say because it was edited, but it seems to me like probably what happened is the interview pushed a little bit because then he was like, oh, and also the ladies. Oh, and for each of these men, he would like say a name and then he gave like basically like a 1 or 2 paragraph like description of what they did. And he's like, also the ladies, and he mentioned me and gave a great review of my book. So like actually like I didn't like it didn't impact me poorly. And then he named like 3 other women, none of whom he said a single word about.
Wow.
And like, so I mean, and that's a person I know, and I'm not trying to like throw him under the bus, like, but I think like, you know, it's like ingrained. Like I'm sure he didn't know he was doing that. That wasn't like a conscious choice he was making, but that definitely happened, right? And but that to me is like, I would say that's like an acceptable level of misogyny and erasure, but like that is not a level I'm gonna like get like. I noticed, but you know what? I'll tell you, if one of those ladies hadn't been me, I might not have even noticed that happened. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if I was listening in like a field that isn't my field, like if somebody asked to talk about like hot biologists and they named 10 men and then we're like, oh, and also the ladies, I mean, I probably would have noticed. But I'm saying like I noticed extra because I this is an egotistical thing to say. I was waiting for him to get to me on that list. I'm like, about me though, I should be on that list, right? Like that sounds like an egotistical thing to say, but I'm just saying like it's not that big of a field. So like being in the top 12 people in the field, there's only like 20 people in the field, so I'm like queen of obscuristan, right? Like
Absolutely.
but so,
and your work is good too and deserves to be at the top.
I mean, well, at least in the top 10 out. I mean, it wasn't that mine wasn't in the top 10. It's that not a single woman was in the top 10. And also he was like, and then the ladies.
Yeah, that's terrible.
You know what I mean? Like it was, I didn't care for that, but whatever. Like I'm not mad about it, but I'm saying like, that's the level that I see today, which is like, you know, frustrating. Okay. As opposed to when I was young, like, so I initiated into the OTO in 1998, late 1998. And I want to be clear that like what I'm saying about my experience with the OTO was about my specific experience with my particular OTO. It was a camp. There's like grades, it's like lodge, and I don't know, camp is like a mini lodge. I'm sure you know better than I do.
Camp is the baby one, and then it's Oasis and then lodge.
Oh, maybe it was an Oasis. I don't know. It'd been around for a long time.
Yeah, that's a while.
It was coming in new, and I had just moved to town, which is actually why I joined. Like I moved to town and I just wanted to meet some magicians.
Yeah.
And, like, it was 1999 and there were like I don't know, the OTO was who was in the phone book, basically. Like there were not it wasn't like the internet today where it's like really easy to meet people. Right? So that's what I joined for. And it's not like I objected to like the OTO style magic or the OTO like theology, I guess, but like it just wasn't my thing. Like I wasn't that into, right? But that was fine. Like I joined to meet people, but okay. So, and let me also preface like all of this by the national OTO came down on this this local order doesn't exist anymore. So like I landed in a particularly OTO is what I'm saying, right? So I don't want to paint the entire OTO with this branch, but I mean, this was not the only experience like this I had, or many other people I'm sure have had, right? So no, and so I was like 19 or 20. I was young, right? And the group there was me and a bunch of men who, like, I want to say old, but when I think about it, probably younger than I am now, right? So, like my age, actually, but substantially
Yeah.
older than me, right? So I would say the next youngest person was probably in their late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the people were probably in their early to mid 40s, which is how old I am, right? And then some older people. It was all men except for one woman who was married to one of the men.
Yep, that's how it used to be.
Right. And I am told that a fist fight broke out. Like, let me think about how to say this without giving away secrets. So,
Hey, this is Lynn post production. I'm letting you know that I cut out the part about Sarah's initiatory experience to keep this podcast episode spoiler free. So everyone who wants the opportunity to experience an initiation has the opportunity to do so without spoilers. And I think an important thing to remember too is that as occultists, magicians, witches, whatever you want to say, we like to think of ourselves as better than the rest of society in which we exist. But the truth is, we are in our smaller communities a microcosm of the larger
yeah,
macrocosm
exactly.
of the society in which we exist. And
Yeah.
so a lot of those problems that exist, and I'm talking sexism, misogyny,
Mm-hmm.
racism, all of these problems
Right.
that exist in the larger society absolutely do exist in these smaller communities. And that's one of the things I like to do
Right.
as a local organizer myself and a community
Mm-hmm.
leader is be mindful of the type of values we have as a local small community.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
this can be a coven, this can be just a casual group, but being mindful of these goals and these values and
Right.
making sure the actions of those members are in alignment with that and intentionally creating the culture you want.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
when you mindfully create that, regardless of what group it is,
Right.
you have the potential to finally break free of that. But it's
Right.
also important to remember new people coming in, you don't know where they're coming from. So
Right.
whether it's not a secret, I'm a local officer, my local OTO body, and
Right.
I encounter a lot of people who are brand new, just came from some high control religion, whether that's Christianity, Mormonism, whatever that is, and they're ready to jump into the pot into something else. And they bring those overarching cultural values, that misogyny with them, that idea that women are inferior, the idea that women serve men, and that's not okay.
Right. I
Especially with,
totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
yeah.
And I will also say that, like, I think that, look, I think we all know that, like, the OTO still has some problems on that front. But I
Mhm.
will say that, like, I think it is a million times better than it used to be. So I would say, like, my current local OTO lodge. So, like, as I said, 20 years ago, basically,
Mhm.
and all, like, I came in. What I'm saying is this lodge was already in, like, a disaster when I came in as a new person. Like, there was
Sure.
a lot of, like, this was like, it was not like just me that got this thing canceled. Like, I didn't do that. Like, it was already a cluster, right? But
Mhm.
like the local one now, which is, I don't know, maybe 10 years old at this point, Golden Thread is female led, like,
Mhm.
or I don't know, queer and female led, like, seems great. I've encountered many good OTO lodges and
Mhm.
like other organizations, but I do think that broadly the OTO does still have like a gender problem. And I think, like, as an outsider, right, like, that's not, I'm not trying to like shit on your church, right? Like, but I do think that, like, the underlying structure and theology of it has some gender issue in it. Like, it's
Oh,
a gendered practice.
I completely disagree with that. I think it's a
Okay.
very forward-thinking philosophy.
I think it was
Um,
super forward thinking in 1908.
I think it still is, and I think there's people like myself who are re-examining the holy text and talking about them in a way that is queer inclusive, that is
Sure.
female inclusive, and that's what it comes down to. People, local community organizers,
Yeah.
and the new things they're bringing, the new energy. It's not just myself.
Right.
There's some really interesting movement in the direction of the work of David Shoemaker, for example, in
Mm-hmm.
Kabbalistic psychology,
Yeah.
but also myself as being very
Right.
queer and very
Yeah.
femme-centric.
So that, maybe let me rephrase what I was saying. I think there are a lot of amazing individual local OTOs. My impression is that that kind of forward thinkingness is not so much the case in the national and international leadership. is what I am told by people in the OTO. I mean, like, that's what I'm saying, is that I do think there's like some structural problems at the top, but maybe getting better.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to international, but I can speak to the US. Definitely getting better. People are definitely working on it. Yeah, so.
And like I said, I think like anything, what really it comes down to is like your local leadership.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like the difference, like, this is going to sound weird, but so this is some advice for people who are like looking for a local group, but they don't know what kind. And like what I would say is like the kind honestly matters less than like the differences between OTO lodges are almost as big as the difference between like an OTO lodge and a Golden Dawn lodge and like a ceremonial Wiccan coven. Like it's really about the specific local thing, and you just gotta, and Judaism would say shul shopping. You just gotta like try some groups until you find one that works. And I would say that like you should pick that based on the specific one that is like in your region, rather than picking like an organization first and then going to find it. Like just see what your options are locally.
Yeah.
And some of them are great and some of them aren't. And that's fact about the OTO, but also about literally everything else. I mean, there's probably some that are just universally terrible, but I've never seen one where they're all excellent.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice about, and another thing I've been reflecting on, and today in particular, is this idea of community. And I've talked about this a lot before, but there is this general idea, especially this really came out of the COVID times during lockdown and all of that, you know, we are officially, with the internet and all of our archives and all of our Zoom meetings, we officially no longer need in-person rituals, community events, all of that. And I couldn't disagree more with that.
I completely agree with you.
And same with the studies that are currently coming out, saying that yes, having a life partner or partners, if you're poly or ethically non-monogamous, whatever can be, romantic relationships are great and important, but what is also important are platonic relationships and platonic friendships. And this idea of community and being a part of it is so woven into the human experience, and it's essential. We need it. We are social creatures, and in order to break into those communities, sort of like you were talking about shopping around, but also being aware of the fact, regardless of what friendship you're trying to make, you know, you do have to have that vulnerability of showing up, that vulnerability of talking one-on-one with people and seeing if there's a connection, and if you want to go further with that friendship or that community.
Absolutely. And I say that, so I do a lot of these interviews, right? And a question you always get asked is like, what's your piece of advice for new magicians? And it's that, find a co-magician. It doesn't have to be like a whole group of people. Like the difference between doing magic yourself and doing magic with one other person is a much bigger difference than like one person versus like 5 or 6, or even like a bigger group, right? But like get at least one co-magician just as soon as you can. And I would say it is actually valuable if their style of practice, which I mean both in like an aesthetic sense and also in a like paradigmatic sense. Like there's ways to talk about like kinds of magic. And I feel like sometimes it's about like just kind of the aesthetics and like that piece of it. And then there's another kind that's about like the underlying understanding of like how this works. But on either of those, I think like it's actually valuable when that person does not completely agree with you on those things. Because it really forces you to like articulate. It forces you to actually explain what you are talking about to someone who will at least be a little bit skeptical and be like, no, Sarah, that's nonsense. You're talking nonsense. Right. And also the other way, like when you get really like, oh, none of it's real, I'm just confused, I'm just deluding myself, they'll be like, no, I was there that time we blah, 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 you know? And so, yeah, I think getting a co-magician is so important.
Yeah, I completely agree.
You don't have to, like when you're shopping, like, I don't think you have to shop around for the people whose like beliefs match your own. You just shop around for like people you want to hang out with.
Yeah, and
You just
keeping that
like them
vet.
and they treat you right and they're just like
Yeah.
genuinely wholesome, good people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was going to add into that. We just said wholesome and good, but I was going to
Yeah.
say that vetting, make sure those standards you're applying to your own life and the people you're letting
Right.
into your own life are also reflected in your magical work and magical community.
Exactly.
And this really reflects back on this idea, especially for AFAB people and women and femme folks, the whole thing, because especially within the occult space, there are some very ignorant ideas that unfortunately have not died yet. I think a lot of us are
Right.
working very hard to kill them.
Yeah.
But one of them, I encountered this in a comment yesterday. That's how fresh this is for me, which
Right.
which is the idea that I am not a magician in and of myself, but I serve my male partner in his work. And that is not true. I
I would
feel
straight up hit a guy in the face if he told me that.
so
Like,
when I feel very blessed that I have such an amazing, healthy, beautiful relationship with a man I'm in love with. Don't get me wrong, I'm valued from every day, and
right.
I am so excited that I do get to do magical work with him. You know, he assists me in my Enochian scrying, he assists me in my other projects, but please be aware that that Enochian work is my own and he is actually my assistant.
Right.
Same with this YouTube channel, same with my writing. Before I even met him, I was published twice.
Yeah.
You know, I this podcast is my
You know,
initiative,
this
and I
came
feel
up this came up in our previous conversation, and I was saying I didn't even know you were married to that guy.
yeah,
Like I do know him. Like I mean, I know who that is, but like
yeah,
I actually had no idea you two were married. Like I just knew who you were by yourself.
yeah. So I mean,
So like, hopefully that makes you feel a little bit. You know, that's and
it is, and
yeah.
I think
I
it's
mean, even
important to yeah.
even I get that sometimes, and I don't
Wild.
even like I don't even have a male magician. I mean, I have guys in my coven, but
Mm-hmm.
like even I get that, and I don't even know who they're talking about when they say like
They're
what
talking about the secret chief in your life that you didn't even know you had.
very secret chief.
We all have this secret chief. But seriously, I think it's important to remember that women, we are people and we do our own magical work, and this
Yeah,
has been the case since the dawn of time.
right.
And
Like
unfortunately, and this is real, and I think some people are going to hear what I'm about to say and they're going to bristle against it, but it is a true fact that the work of women in our larger society, as well as in the occult, where we're supposed to be doing better, but we're not, has been swept under the rug and it
yeah,
has been marginalized.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, no question, and
And yeah,
continues to be so.
and continues to be
You know,
so.
when I put out my first book, I was recommended to put it out under SL Mastros, so I didn't give away that I was a girl on the cover.
Yeah, I believe it. It still exists today.
Yeah,
And
like,
and that hurts. And it hurts that people
yeah,
approach my work with such skepticism and they think, oh, you're just watering down the occult. You're just doing, it's like, no, I'm a serious magician and my work is
yeah,
quite serious. And I
yeah,
feel very blessed that there are people. When I first started out, I was completely single, and that was a rocky road for me. It's been a rocky road for about a decade as a solo
right.
practitioner and as a single person. And fun fact, I did initiate into the OTO single, as well as the Golden Dawn group I was a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine all that came with it. I was
I
very
can.
blessed to have a good local group, but you know, there were some rotten eggs there. No longer
Yeah,
in my personal experience.
right.
However, I it's wild to me to watch the real-time devaluation of my work
Yeah,
and who I am because of how I look, and
yeah,
people are
absolutely.
clinging to these archaic ideas of gender and roles.
Which also are ahistoric. Like that was not
Boom.
like that's not how it was in the past either. Just like right, like again, we were gonna bring up Moina Mathers.
Yeah.
Like it gets painted. I'm gonna put her off as a specific example later. But like these historical women also, like when you read the accounts, if you read carefully and like look at it, it's clear that like they are doing way more than they are being credited for.
100%.
Even then. So like it's not the case that even historically, like it was always like a male magician and a female vessel. I'm also gonna throw this out there. Independent of gender, I think that in the kind of magic where one person is like the scryer or the vessel or however with the medium, right? And the other person is like the magician or the conjurer, however we want to say it. I think broadly it is always wise in any partnership to like switch up those roles over time, because I think it creates an like independent of gender, right? Like if it's a man and a woman, but also two men, two women, two like other options, right? Like I think it creates an unhealthy power dynamic otherwise. So like
yeah, absolutely.
like even if it's not gendered, it shouldn't be that one person is always being the vessel and one person is always being the conjurer, in my opinion. I just think it's like in a social way, I think it will queer up, no pun intended, it'll like mess up your friendship. But also, like, it just magically spirit, I find it, let me think about how to say this, interacting with the same spirit through a variety of vessels, like the vessel isn't 100% clean and I don't want to say like pure, but I'm saying like the medium is always biasing the communication. And so when you talk to a spirit through like a variety of mediums, I think you like it's more effective. Like you can like triangulate between those different biases almost.
I love this point so much, which is one of the reasons why when I do oracles on the equinoxes, I choose a bunch of different methods. And this last equinox, I was very blessed to be joined by a lot of people. And I was like, all right, it's not just going to be me choosing all the oracles. We have a bunch of different people coming to the table with their own energy, their own internal set of symbols. And you get a whole spread. And what was really cool was to watch the pattern emerge from person to person to person. And I'm talking similar numbers, similar stories, similar themes.
It's like very confirmatory when you watch that happen, especially when you're like at a festival or something. So like you definitely did not plan this in advance. Like it's just some brand. Yeah, and I do think in bigger groups, I think it's an even worse power dynamic when like one person effectively gets to be like the voice of the gods.
I agree.
think is deeply problematic when only one person is doing that. Like I understand that there is some amount of like skill you like. I mean, I actually do. I throw noobs in the triangle on day one and like just make them do it, right? But I understand that like maybe you want to like get a little bit of training before you do that. But like it can't be one person gets to do that all the time.
I agree, and I'm actually in your camp. I've definitely been criticized in the past for giving noobs too much to take on, whether it's reading assignments or magical work. But I think that's how we learn.
I agree. And
I'm not talking. And I'm making distinct. I'm not talking about dangerous practices. I'm talking about things that people think, oh, you can't approach Enochian because it's too complicated. But I say if someone's genuinely really raring to go, why not let them experiment with Enochian, you know?
And also, I would say almost nothing is dangerous if someone in the room knows what they're doing.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like if it's three noobs, like maybe that work would be dangerous for them. But if like you or I or somebody who just knows what they're doing is in the room with them, like I'm just gonna, if things go wrong, I'm just gonna take over and remedy the situation, which has never happened. I will say in like I'm okay. That's not true. That's not true. I have had little things go, but I mean, it all worked out fine. Yeah. But I have had people like have a seizure or a panic attack.
Yes,
doing,
that happens.
Trance possession, but I mean, they were fine. Like, and they did it again the next week. I mean, like, didn't deter them either. But I mean, but somebody has to know what they're doing. But almost nothing is dangerous if you have a babysitter, basically, like a magician babysitter. So yeah, I'll possess a noob by a demon point. In fact, if anybody's interested, at Sacred Space in the spring, I'm doing a goetic trance possession ritual.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was about ready to plug your work. So for people who are brand new or wanting to dip their toes into different things, or if you're an experienced person wanting to experience a different perspective, check out your classes, check out your work. Yeah. And in terms of like what I have going on, the last thing I'm doing this year is unfortunately members only OTO of presentation, but it's a take on talking about thelemic holidays because no one talks about those. It's always the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and there there are sacred days as laid out by the Book of the Law,
Mhm.
and some interesting connections there throughout the year. So, but I get into some of the initiate only stuff. But if you are excited about getting your toes into that stuff, follow me for more
Yeah.
because I'm going to be talking about this a lot, especially this coming year. But yeah, I also offer tons of stuff in person for people to dip their toes into. And
Mhm.
I always say this, I think there's a real risk, especially for new energetic people, to burn out. And I think you should really be battling
Yes.
the burnout. And if there is something you're genuinely interested in, take a bite because
Mhm.
you should nourish yourself in those interests and those passions because
Yeah,
they
I
will
agree.
run dry. And don't
100%.
don't
Yeah.
put it off for 3-4 years from now when you feel like you're finally ready. I think that's the big, someone's like, I gotta read every old grimoire before I can do a
No.
single thing. And I'm like,
Like
that's how you burn out.
historically many magicians were illiterate. You definitely don't have to read a bajillion books to become a magician.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah, like it seems like you do because we live in a culture where everybody's learning magic out of books, and the sort of people who write books are like bookish people. So you're almost
Hmm.
like, if you learn magic out of books, you're always gonna get like this like bookish, like I'm a bookish person, you're a bookish
Same.
person, right? Like, but I mean, like I try to articulate in my books like, hey, you don't actually have to be a nerd to do magic.
Hmm.
I mean, being a nerd is awesome, and I do a lot of nerd magic, but like, there's lots of non-nerd magic also available.
Yes, 100%. And this is a great moment for me to talk about class related issues because
Mm-hmm.
so often when we frame this, oh, you, in order to call yourself a witch or a magician, you have to do this, this, and this, and like study this and memorize this and like have like this long list. It's like, okay, first of all, who's curating these hurdles to jump over? Who are you to be
Right.
the barrier to the divine to begin with? But second of all, realistically speaking, magic is for everyone, every type of person, and many people have work multiple jobs just to get by.
Yeah.
Many
I
people
agree.
have kids to take care of. They have elderly
Mm-hmm.
people to take care of. And if you have 10 minutes in the evening to dedicate to some kind of a practice, whether it's like devotional, prayer, whatever that looks like for you, I think that's beautiful. And I respect the person who does what they can with what they have so much, and that is so valid.
100%. Can we
100%.
can we talk for a second about like if you only had 10 minutes a night, like what would
Yes,
you
let's do
advise
it.
doing?
Go for
Okay.
it. Go for it.
Okay, so what I would say is 3-minute meditation, right? And I mean
Mm,
like, I know sometimes the word meditation can be like really fuzzy, but I mean really like pretty specific. Like I do a kind called Vipassana or like Zazen or like some kind of like really quite meditation qua meditation, not just like chill out with a cup of tea, but meditate 3 minutes,
mm.
which is a surprisingly long time to quiet your mind for a beginner. Like if you can keep your mind quiet for 3 minutes, that's it took me, I will say, probably months of meditating to be able to do that, right? But every time you like notice that you're distracted and be like, nope, nope, I'm going back to my meditation, that's winning. Like that's not failing to meditate, that's succeeding at meditating. So 3 minutes of that. 5-minute, I would say personally ancestor, right? Like if I'm just
Okay.
giving random advice to like random generic people, I would say like ancestor, you get a lot of bang for your buck.
Sure.
Just like connect to your ancestors, which doesn't mean like it doesn't have to mean your immediate ancestors of blood,
Mm.
right? Like, so we have a saying in my circle that like everyone's roots grow in shit. Like even I had really good parents, but even for me, like as soon as you go back 2 or 3 generations, like
Uh-huh.
everybody has terrible fucking people. Everybody.
Sure.
So like you don't it doesn't have to be like your immediate ancestors, but just like the soul collective, like going back to like first mother and first father, like of human ancestry, right?
Yeah.
Spend like a couple minutes like connecting with that force and with the idea that like there is only one family tree on earth and that all living things are connected, and really trying to like
Mm.
physically feel that connection in your body and think about like what that means for like your relationship to other human beings and your relationship to your ancestors and your relationship to not human like other living beings, and
Yes.
also to like descendants yet to come. Like 5 minutes, pour out a cup of water. If you can, maybe also light a candle, but I understand that for many people in a dorm or a jail or whatever, candles are tricky, but like a cup of water that you can splash some on the ground, I think pretty much everybody can do that, right? And then Okay, so I have 2 minutes left, right?
Yeah.
And then I would rotate through the planets on the days. I would spend the next 2 minutes
Oh, nice.
on each planet, right? So like on Mondays, I would spend 10 minutes like thinking about the moon and like how the moon plays out in my life and like just being in love with the moon. And then on like Tuesdays, Mars. I think, yeah, that's my 10 minutes. All right.
I love that. And I mean, and also you can do little things. Speaking of just like really quick little things someone can do, I love the idea on, if you can and have the ability, incorporating some color of that particular day into your wardrobe. I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
and obviously a lot of people are wearing uniforms or that's not available to them, but if you could like
Yeah.
maybe have a piece of jewelry even.
Right. So like I see you're wearing red because it's Tuesday. So I mean you're wearing red and it is Tuesday. I don't want to say that that's why, right? But similarly, I don't always do a color of the day, but I do match the like color of my outfit to like what I'm doing this day. So I'm teaching. Like today is a teaching day and I'm like interviewing with you, so I'm yellow. Like yellow is like my teaching color. But like if you see me teach Solomonic magic in particular, you'll see me in blue and white. Like I match them to like I agree. I think color, which could be the color of the day, which I think for most people is usually the color of the planet of the day, or like some other reason. But I agree. I think color is so like overlooked as a magical power, but it is so easy to introduce into almost anything. Like almost any magic, you can just color it in.
Yes.
And I think it provides like a lot of power. So like my books, I try and always have like coloring book style illustrations and I color them in. So like in that Pentacle book, the copy on my desk, I color them in.
Your book is somewhere behind me, but I'm not gonna fumble. I don't want people watching to be like, why do I see Lynn's back for a good 10 minutes? There we go. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. Let's see if I have a colored one in here. See, so
oh
I just
my gosh,
color them in
beautiful.
with colored pencils.
You have good coloring skills. And you know what? Even if you can't color that nicely, it's still valid.
I mean, well, I color oh, here's a trick. I think more than the fact that I'm good at coloring, I am not using like 50-cent little kid colored pencils. I bought the like grown-up colored pencils, which like, so I have a roommate who like went to art school and is like is a serious artist, and he like is the one who taught me that like no, actually like the good art supplies are way better. Like they work better and you get better art out of them. So like I had to convince myself that I was like worth $20 colored pencils, but like yeah.
I actually recently made that jump myself. And there is a big difference between like the Crayola scratchy, crusty ones and the smooth.
And like the Crayola ones are still way better than the like dollar store ones.
Yeah, they get waxier and crustier as you go down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they just don't get any color out. They like leave like little bits of stuff on what you're trying to color. Yeah.
Yeah. No. But also no shame if someone, you know, all they can afford is the crusty ones.
You should definitely
cool
start
too.
with that. I'm just saying, like, if you can afford it.
Yes.
Prismacolor Premier, I will say.
Oh, I love those. Yeah, I have 3 packs of those.
Yeah,
they're so cool. I love them.
And they're not like, those aren't the like super expensive artist ones. Those are like art student level.
But yeah, I love your 10-minute practice, and I think that'll be a great thing for people to take away from. I would probably say meditation and prayer, and that's like so vague. Like that's like such a vague thing to tell people. For my own personal practice, which I think you should substitute in whatever meditation works for you and what that means for you, and same with prayer. I mean, ancestors, you know, deities, whatever that looks like in your belief system and your practice. But for me, when I was having an extremely hectic year or two, my daily devotional practice was to Nuit, and just simply reciting a poem. And sometimes that was reciting it in my head. Yeah, it's really nice if we can have like a full-fledged practice. Like I do Liber Rush Vel Helios 4 times a day at the 4 stations of the sun. I banish in the morning and the evening. I do this. But like realistically, especially for working people or like families, whatever, that's just not going to work out. And but yeah, I love those 10-minute day practices. And that's
the best daily practice is the one you're going to actually do.
So true.
Oh,
so true.
Also, I want to tell people, like, you know, daily practice doesn't have to be the same thing every day.
Yes.
So I will say for me, one of the reasons I like mixed it up with the planets is because like early in my magic career, I was always told like, oh, you have to have a daily practice. You have to have a daily. Like, first of all, I will say I do not have a daily. Like, there is not a piece of. I mean, there's stuff I do almost every day. Like, I do have an ongoing meditation practice, but it's not the same every day. And I feel like when I try and do this exactly same thing every day, I get bored really fast. So, like, you
Hmm.
should practice daily, but you don't have to do the exact same thing
Yeah.
every day. Just like if you were an athlete, you're not necessarily like you should train every day, but that doesn't necessarily mean doing the exact same training every day. Like, I think sometimes it's better to like go real hard on one, like, you know, leg day
Yeah.
and arm day. It
I
can
was
be
just
different
thinking
things.
leg day, but for the occult. I love that.
Right, exactly, right? And so,
Yeah,
like, and I think the easiest way to stay on top of that is to tie it to the calendar somehow, right? So either
absolutely.
like a planetary day of the week or like a lunar cycle or something like
Yeah,
that, where
that's
it's just
great.
natural. Like, then you always know what you're supposed to be doing today. But
Hmm.
I also think you should give yourself the freedom to, like, if that's not the thing to do today, to just do something else,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know?
And this sort of reminds me of a question I get often is what do I do if I have ADHD? And or what do I do if I have some sort of executive dysfunction disorder? And well, first of all, I'm not a trained medical professional to help you with that. You know, obviously
Right.
seek a therapist, but as someone with ADHD myself, I feel qualified in some capacity, at least talk about my own personal experiences, which is I valued a lot when I let go of this notion that I had to have an intense practice every single day and for it to look exactly the same. And if I
Yeah,
missed a day,
exactly.
my life was over. And I realized early on in my practice that it had become another metric by which to measure my self-worth, and I was beating
Mhm.
myself up about it. And
Yeah,
that is so
exactly.
toxic. And that is something that I think comes from my own background, my own upbringing is to
Uh-huh.
find something to feel bad about or something to
Right.
don't allow, especially within a pagan, you
Yeah.
know, esoteric space, don't allow self-imposed metrics
Right.
to make you feel bad about yourself because
Right.
again, I think it's beautiful and absolutely spiritually valid to be honoring yourself and where you're at
Yeah.
every
A
single
hundred
day. And
percent. Yeah.
if you're having a bad day, if you're having an inattentive day, if something is blowing up in your life, I think it's spiritually significant and beautiful to recognize where you're at, recognize your thoughts in the moment and be like, "All right, we're having a bad day. Let's keep
Yeah,
going."
exactly. And I also think like daily practice, it shouldn't be a thing you have to do every day.
Yeah,
It should be a thing you get to do every day. Like you should be like,
absolutely.
I am having a terrible day. Oh, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna get to talk to my ancestors and like have that little
Mhm.
tiny piece of calm that's just for me. And like you should be excited, like, oh, I get to do magic today. Not like, oh, it's one more chore I have to do today. Like it should be fun. Which is not to say magic isn't work, but I really think, especially for beginners, I think we emphasize the work too much. Like, if you were in your first
Mm-hmm.
year or two of doing magic, I actually don't think it should be that much work. It should be fun. Like, you should just
I
be
agree.
playing. Like, it should be play. And, like, once you get serious about it, like, yeah, there's parts that are work. They're like hard bullshit work where I, like, you know, do like terrible Hebrew code cracking for 8 hours until I want to cry. And like, there's just work. But at the beginning level, it should be play and not work. And I hear all the time people are like, oh, you got to be willing to do the work. But like, I don't think you do. I
Yeah,
think
I
you
agree with
should
that for
play,
sure.
especially for, like, again, that is advice for beginners. Like, at a
Yeah.
certain point, you do have to buckle down and do some work, but not at the beginning. Like, it should just be fun. It should be fun.
Yeah, definitely. And
Like,
sort of bringing this back to sort of this thread of like
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
community as
Absolutely.
well. Oh, no, this is great. This is good stuff. And I think bringing this thread back to this idea of like people who have been around for a while and are
Mm-hmm.
trying to intentionally create community, get involved with community. Maybe they've been a solo practitioner for a really long time and like, all right, I can benefit from another person
Right.
giving me feedback, sharing their energy with me, whatever it is. Um, the question is, as a call to action, if someone was starting in a leadership position or wanted to be in a leadership position, from your perspective, when we talk about creating that intentional culture and values, what are some steps someone could take to educate themselves or make sure that they are creating a good local culture?
So, okay, let me I'm gonna break this down, and let me say first of all, like, I'm not the expert in this.
Sure.
Like, I do not, like, you run a relatively large, like, for me personally, I'm actually not that big into, like, in my years of practice, like, once there's more than like 10 or 12 people in a magical group, I like start to lose interest. Like, like, my coven is 4 people. That's like a great number for me.
Here's a better question. How do people be good people? in a community, how to be a kind, good person who cultivates the kind of energy that is nourishing for themselves and those around them.
So, I mean, look, I mean, I'm gonna sound really preachy, but like, I think that at its core, right? Like, it's about being in a community of people whose values and priorities you share.
Absolutely.
Like, you are invested in that human being and you want their life to be better, but you understand that, like, they know what that means better than you do. Like, you're not trying to run their whole life for them. They're not your 100%. Child. And they're also not your student. I do think that, like I am going to talk about, there are different ways to, like, structure, like, a magical community. And personally, I prefer, like, an egalitarian model where, like, there's some division of labor, like, different people. So we have 4, so ours is elemental. We have 4 elemental roles, which shift from time to time. Like, you're not always in the same role. But, like, it's not like there's one person in, I personally do not care for, like, those pyramid setups with one person in charge at the bottom, except for, like, a classroom setup where, like, someone is teaching, and while they are teaching, there is that. But I think it's, like, a well understood, like, structural mechanism that, like, people are familiar with how that works.
Yeah, right? You put on a hat and then you take it off when it's
exactly.
over.
And I think it's important, like, as a person who's normally in a teacher role, it's actually really important to me that I'm permitted to take that hat off. When I'm, like, I have an actual literal about it, right? Like, like, I have a teaching hat on right now. But I mean, if you're asking me, like, what does it mean to be a good person? Like, that's a hard
that's such a deep question.
It's a hard question to answer in 2 minutes. Here's what I will say. One of my coven mates is a professor of ethics.
I love that.
And so my coven actually has, like, a really detailed understanding. Like, we have a complex, like, cross-elemental ethical theory. But at its very core, it really comes down to this, which, like, is technically, I think, like, Kant's first categorical imperative. But to say it simpler, which is just to say that, like, people are people, and you should treat them like people and not like objects that are there for you to use.
100%.
Like, that a person is not a means to an end, they're an end in and of themselves. So I would say for me, like, in as much as, like, I can talk about, like, what ethics are, that's what the ethics professor in my coven would say, and I mostly defer to him.
I love that. And I mean, I think that really sums it up nicely. And from my own experience, I really view myself, when I'm in a teaching position, when I'm in a leadership position, I view this as an act of service. And an act of service to help people on their spiritual journey get to where they're going. And if that is not with me, awesome. If that's with me, cool. If it's with me for a short period of time, awesome. But it doesn't have, I think when I think about my relationships, friendships, students, whatever the case may be, sort of accepting flexibility there. And I think agree. And I think I'm going to take this back to a surprisingly vulnerable place, but I think a lot of people are going to relate to what I'm about to say here. And it's that in my own personal journey, something I've realized I've done a terrible job at is being a warm, welcoming person who is good at conversation. And that sounds really bizarre to say, but for me, growing up I do not come from a community and a family that was emotional or touchy-feely. They were distant, they were harsh, and they were mean. And so I'm actually a very loving, personable, touchy-feely, emotional person. Like, I love sharing food with people. I love people. That's why I do what I do, because I genuinely love people, but I didn't know how to love people. I didn't know how to start conversation. And there was a sister of mine who's up in New York, and I was like, hey, I'm really bad at having friends and talking to people. Can you help me? And she said, well, I think Americans suck at having friendships. And we can do a lot better job being vulnerable with each other and having intimate one-on-one conversations. And I said, wow, you're right. So I've been reading books and listening to podcasts now about different cultures and how different people approach friendships and interpersonal relationships. But that's a hard nut to crack. And I think we all
It
have our
really
own
is.
childhoods, communities that we're coming out of. And it's so important to get beyond that looking glass and be like, what am I bringing to this situation? What kind of, things, voices from my parents, voices from my community are still in my head and influencing my interactions with others that I may not want, that don't actually reflect my genuine,
Right.
authentic self.
Yeah.
And we're all still working on it,
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Totally agree.
and
And
don't be
also,
ashamed.
like, you can just be like, I'm not saying you said this, right? But
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's this idea that there's like one correct way to people.
100%.
But like, you can just be your own like weird,
yes,
whatever way you do it. And like, that works with the people it works with. Like, my coven is like, here's what I will say. My coven, our retention rate for new members is quite low. Like, the overwhelming majority of people who come in quit sometime in the first year. And that's usually not like every once in a while somebody like rage quits and stomps off because people are people and like whatever. But usually it's just like not for them. And I think that's good, right? Like, and that's sort of what I meant about like, personally, I do prefer those smaller groups.
Yeah.
Right? Where like everybody's got their own vibe. And there's also an amount of like culture to it. So I will say every once in a while we have people coming meetings who are coming in from a very different culture. And really what I'm saying is every once in a while WASPs try and join our coven. And it's not that they are not welcome, but their way of interacting is very different than it is for most of us. And like, because that's like the prevailing American culture, they're not always great at understanding that that is not the only correct way to do it. So like, which is not like a flaw in them. It's just like
for our international listeners, could you define WASP really fast?
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Thank you.
So I will say my coven is, but I will also say, okay, the acronym means White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but actually, like, connotatively, it really means rich White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes.
Like, they came up wealthy and, like, like the rich white people you see on American TV?
Yeah.
That's who I'm talking about. And I'm not that, and nobody else in my coven is that either.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm not saying those people aren't welcome, but there is sometimes like, so what I'm saying is like different culture, like especially in a small group, right? Like the culture can be like quite specific to that group. And so it takes a while to get in. So I'm going to spend, if it's okay with you, I'm going to spend a minute talking about, and I think you should too, talking about like when you're like looking, like when new people are looking at groups.
Yes, I love this.
Like,
Yeah,
not so much what they should be looking for, but like red flags. Like,
yeah, let's do it. I think it's a great conversation.
So first of all, if you see anybody in that group just abusing anyone else in that group.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, ideally, you should just stand up for the person being abused. But I understand that's like a lot to ask for a new person in a group. But like, I personally would not go back to a second meeting. Like, if I showed up at a meeting and somebody was like berating the other people, which to be fair, it's like I have actually lost my temper and screamed at other people in my coven. Like, everybody has, because we're like a family and sometimes we scream at each other, but not in front of new people. Like, what I'm saying is if they can't even be nice when there's new people in the room, no, red flag. 2, if like they demand loyalty or like oaths of secrecy or something, fast. Like, if they're pushing that on you faster than you, if they are pushing you to commit faster than you want to commit, or if they would even accept a commitment on like a first date. I really think, actually, as I think about this, they're exactly the same red flags I would tell people would take, right?
I love that.
Like, don't get married on your first date, and you shouldn't do that with like an occult group either.
100%.
Like, there should be a long period of like getting to know people. And I really think, like, for me, it's important to like, for me, the biggest red flag is when like someone is clearly like silencing other people.
Yeah.
And again, everybody's a dick, like sometimes, right? So I'm not saying the instant somebody is a jerk once, you have to throw them out. But like if there is an ongoing pattern of like one person just consistently asserting authority over other people.
Yeah.
Especially if they are doing that in a way that is like, let me think about how to say this. If they are doing that from a role of a spiritual exemplar.
Yeah.
So like somebody behaving shitty, bad. But somebody who is pretending to be a priest while behaving shitty, totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
Right? Like while they have that teacher hat on, while they have that priest hat on, they have to like behave properly. Like they have to live up to that. Right? And we're all human, so we all make mistakes, right? But like, and part of that, in my opinion, is about like not oppressing people, but it's also about like not centering their own emotional needs, which I see more often. Yes. Like somebody is the teacher or the priest, but actually they are just like complaining about their own life and like seeking emotional validation from students. And I just don't think that's like a right way to behave as a teacher. But I mean, you're still a person. You have to let them, like once you are in a genuine person-to-person relationship with them, you have to let them take that teacher hat off. But if it starts off as a teacher-student relationship, it has to be that. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like they can't. Yeah. Those, to me, if I think about it. Also, if they are demanding money right away.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, saying like it's $5 like entrance at the door because I'm giving everybody a slice of pizza or something. But like if they are asking any kind of meaningful financial contribution early, and if there is no system of like, for me, and this one I will say is a little harsh because a lot of people don't do this, but for me, I am leery of anyone who doesn't have like a scholarship or like a sliding scale or some kind of like work with people and meet them where they are.
I love that. Yes, that is so important. Like, yeah, I mean that speaks to my soul because I started all of the things I'm doing from a place of charity and to better other people's lives. Unfortunately, we live in a world where money has to be a part of that occasionally, but I always make sure there's low to no cost efforts in anything I do. I love the idea of a sliding scale and everything. Yeah, and same with accommodations. I'll piggyback on that.
Exactly. And say,
if, you know, if you are someone who's disabled in a wheelchair and you're like, oh, you can't come, or like, oh, if you say I can't do the thing and they shut the door on you, I think that's a huge red flag as well.
Yeah, but I also understand that like people are meeting, like we meet in my house most of the time. And so like objectively, it is actually quite hard to get a wheelchair into my house. Like there's porch chairs. Yeah. But like when people have brought that up, we have moved the events to places where they could go.
Same here.
You know what I mean? So like it's like I understand that like not every meeting is going to be accessible because like you know, you're meeting in somebody's house, and at least houses I've lived in, like the overwhelming majority of houses I've lived in, you couldn't really get a wheelchair into. But I think like once somebody brings it up, you have to be willing to accommodate. And same with finances. Like I actually don't think there's anything wrong with there being a relatively high cost, as long as that high cost, like there's some kind of like accessibility option, a scholar. I personally like a scholarship model rather than a sliding scale, but whatever. But like some kind of way where like people who can afford it should be subsidizing people who can't. Because like you said, I tried for a long time to keep everything low cost, but what that really meant is I was just paying for everything out of my pocket. Like it wasn't low cost.
That's currently what I'm doing.
Like there is a cost, and I eventually was like other people in my company are making more money than I am. So eventually I was like, hey guys, somebody has to buy a pizza every once in a while.
And that's like the events I run locally. I mean, yes, they're free, but think about all the materials I bring. That's actually me paying for it for myself through my money. So
materials and also space. I mean, I find like with local events, like if I'm not hosting it in my living room, I almost certainly had to pay. Like even a park, like pavilion is not free. And sliced in the city where I live, like even renting a park pavilion in the city is actually quite expensive.
Yeah, it is.
Like there's just a cost to running things that like it's not like, you know, but like that cost has to be shared fairly, and fairly does not mean everybody pays the same amount.
Yeah. So in terms of like red flags, I mean, everything you mentioned, so I'm not going to mention it again, but From my own personal experience, I think well, let me just say it's very dangerous to be a complete newbie and not have a single clue what's going on around you, and then go on the internet and be like, hey guys, who wants to teach me? You are blood in the water in a sea of sharks. And I do
Yeah.
mean that. There are so many spiritual,
Sharks, it's like some sharks,
some sharks,
but they're hard to identify.
they are. And it's important to remember, the same caution you would have on a first date with a person meeting off of a dating app, you
Exactly.
should have with your spiritual community as well. And
Exactly.
obviously, if you're brand new, you're not going to have that frame of reference yet. But if you take it slow and patient and don't rush into anything, and you get
Right.
to know people and you feel things out, just like if it were a date, um,
Right.
then over time you'll get the vibe. And
Exactly.
and
And they should be doing that too. So
yes.
like we mostly have coven meetings at my house, but when there's a new person, they're not
Hmm.
in my living room. Like we
Yeah.
just do it at a restaurant or something. Like we all meet at like a coffee shop or some other like public. Like if they
Hmm.
are inviting you, like it's not just that like as the noob you should be cautious. Like
Hmm.
they should actually be already being cautious on your behalf as well.
100%, because caution on the other side of the group you're joining shows that they're going through the process of vetting people and making sure the
Mhm.
people they bring into their space are safe for those already there, which is something
Exactly.
you should look for as well.
Yeah,
And
100%.
and so, like, at least, like, some of the traditions I'm from, yeah, you can really get a sense of the different groups out there and the different styles and the different beliefs. And I think you don't have to know everything that someone believes in the group immediately, and you don't have to agree with everything, but have some idea of the flavor of the group you're joining, and the different nuances before you really make that commitment.
Yeah,
And also have a
100%.
firm idea of what you want from the group. Is it community? Is
Right.
it ritual experience? Is there a condition where you'll get to a certain point in the group and be like, I have made it, and now it's time for me to transition out of the group?
Mhm.
Or is there a condition in which you're like, I can't do this anymore, and you leave? I think
Right.
having those boundaries are also really
Yeah,
important.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I also just really encourage people like to not always think of it like I said when I joined the OTO, my
Mhm.
only goal was to meet other magicians. Like
Yeah.
I was not actually looking like I already knew when I got
Mhm.
in that the OTO was like not going to be my
Yeah.
long-term spiritual home, but that was
100%.
okay. And even that lodge, there is still one person I met there that like I'm still friends.
That's
The
so
person I
great.
took my Minerval with, actually. So the
Aw.
Minerval is I know you know this, but for the audience, like the Minerval is like the 0 degree, like the very
Mhm.
first thing you do, basically. And like the person I did that with and I are still friends. So
And
like,
yeah.
and the people I met there, they did
Mhm.
introduce me to other people. So like in addition to going to like groups, you can also just like once you meet a couple, like you actually only have to meet one extroverted magician to meet every magician in town. Like, you know what
So
I mean?
true, so true.
Yeah.
And
So
let me
like,
just say this as a
yeah,
local OTO officer, if someone comes to the group and has no interest in initiating and just wants to do some
right.
social stuff,
Yeah,
that is so valid. And like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
I don't think initiating or even coming to the Gnostic Mass is for everyone. I always say this story. There's a ninth degree who's really well known, who's been around forever, who absolutely abhors and hates the Gnostic Mass. He has never participated once, and he hates it,
I think,
and
yeah,
that's completely valid. So,
right.
at least in the local group, or one of the
Yeah,
local groups I run, you know, I'd come, be social, meet people, and continue that.
exactly.
Actually, I encourage people, if you make that connection, whether platonic or whatever, continue that outside of the group for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly, exactly. And also, like when you're looking to meet people, you can go to like not one group event. So things like
Yeah.
Pagan Pride Day, or just like show up at your local witch bookstore and like ask to be like everybody behind that counter has that job because they want to meet other witches.
Yeah,
Like
and
that's
it's
why they're working at that job. So
for
they're
sure.
definitely down to hang out with you.
So I will say sometimes, unfortunately, locally, I think this is really a function also of being in the southern US.
Yeah.
There's a really hostile culture towards occultists, witches, pagans, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually don't have a pagan pride day anymore, and a lot of
Sad.
the bookshops actively do not allow us in their spaces.
Oh,
However,
that's so sad.
I have found a local coffee shop that is so amazing. I'll just plug them really fast. They're called Chapel of Bones, and at night
Good
they
name.
are a music venue, and during the day they are a coffee shop, and they have been amazing at allowing me to use their space for bibliomancy
Awesome.
classes, tarot classes. They even draw a little pentagram in the coffee with syrup if you want that. So it's just so fun.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, I'm so spoiled by like living in a like northeastern city.
yes, I'm jealous.
Like, yeah, no, like we have multiple witch stores in Pittsburgh.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Some of them better than others, but like there's plenty of them. And
We
we have a
got we
pagan
got a
pride
coffee
day.
shop that's friendly. So, which is amazing.
Well, we do not. I mean, we have pagan friendly coffee shops, but we don't have like a one coffee shop wherever.
Yeah.
You know, it goes the other way too. I will say that like I'm not saying like it's better for witches to be a little oppressed or whatever, but it does like build a sense of community where
Sure.
like when there's no like common enemy, like maybe everybody's there's a lot of like clique nonsense.
There really is. And I'm glad I don't have enough energy to stay up with all the witch infighting.
Same.
But I'm sure it's there.
But it's like doing everything. Like I have a friend who's a Presbyterian minister, and like Presbyterian churches are also super political, and like everybody. Like that's not a fact about the occult. That's just a fact about humans.
It is. That's a human situation for sure.
Like, yeah.
So transitioning, so we talked a little bit about community and sort of bringing this conversation to the gold star, the thing we've been hyping, which is Moina Mathers, because I think she is a great example of someone whose contributions may have been erased and tucked under the rug a little bit. So we, of course, hear a lot about the men of the Golden Dawn and their work, but there were a lot of important women as well, including Moina Mathers. So do you believe that she contributed significantly to the Golden Dawn and the occult?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't really think it's a matter of it. Like, I think absolutely she did. I think if you like study the Golden Dawn history, it would be hard to argue that she did. Right? Yeah. That being said, it's certainly not as obvious her contributions. And I think that is partly because of misogyny, but I will also say like she does give the impression of having been the sort of person who was like quite quiet and kind of wanted to stay out of the spotlight as well. So like I'm not saying entirely that just like her husband like erased her. I do think there's some of that, like to be clear, but I do also think that for her in particular, I think she was just kind of a quiet, shy person because, you know, a lot of people in her family were kind of famous. And I think like growing up in that kind of bubble, I think is sometimes those people don't always want that amount of attention. But yeah, I think she unquestionably was an important contributor. And like you can tell, like if you look at things, like if you look at SL Mathers, so Samuel Mathers, I know you know this, but like we have an audience, right? So I'm going to explain for them. So the Golden Dawn is founded by a couple of people, including Samuel Mathers. And relatively soon thereafter, he becomes involved with a woman who is then named Mina Bergson. She's the philosopher Henri Bergson's little sister, actually. And her father was a prominent musician. And her grandmother, maybe her great-grandmother, was a very prominent, very wealthy, like, sponsor of neo-Hasidism. Modern Kabbalah, like in the Jewish community, like her great grandmother Temerl Bergson, like in many ways founded that movement in Poland. So like she came from a quite prominent family, but so they hooked up and married relatively quickly. By modern standards, it was a short courtship. But like if you look at his work, there's like a year where he suddenly gets real good at Hebrew and like Jewish mythology, and it's the year he married the daughter of a prominent Jewish family. So like I think you can pretty clearly see, but also like if you read like letters and things, like they said it too. Like William Elliot said she was the best magician in the Golden Dawn. Right? So like I think that, you know, it's not fully erased. It's just kind of like covered over. So if you only read like the Wikipedia article about Golden Dawn history, you'd have no idea who she even is. Probably. I did not look at the Wikipedia article before I said that. Right. But like, if you like look more into the history, I think there's a lot of really prominent women making really, really important contributions, right, in the Golden Dawn. There's a really good book by Mary K. Greer called, I looked it up and I still don't remember. I think it's called Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels, Priestesses, something and something.
Yeah.
But it's Mary K. Greer, Women of the Golden Dawn, which is like that, as far as I have found, by far the best information on women in the Golden Dawn broadly, but also Moina Mathers particularly. I will say a new book came out just recently about Moina Mathers and Henri Bergson, her older brother, that like I haven't read, that claims to have a lot of information about her, but I haven't read it yet, so I don't know if it's any good or not.
Yeah, and that Women in the Golden Dawn book is also on my suggested reading list for Golden Dawn works. 10 out of 10, definitely recommend it.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And this really comments on a broader discussion about how, due to acculturation and our larger society, that the contributions of men and women over time sometimes look differently. So, especially in history, where the people getting the book deals, the people being allowed to publish, were men. So it's not that women necessarily didn't want to.
Or women pretending to be men.
Boom. Or women pretending to be men. Exactly. And go for it.
The very first, like, book on, like, the very first like serious magic book, right? So I started on like some books about Wicca, and this is not a slam on Wicca, but the particular books I ran into, they like were disappointing for me. I wanted to learn magic, and what I was being taught was like goddess worship, and I love the goddess, like no complaints there, but I wanted to learn magic.
Yeah.
Right? And the very first book I actually got into that I found was in my local library, which like I grew up the kind of place you're talking about. Like we didn't have a witch books, right? Like, but I found a book in the history section because Christians would take the things in the occult section, Christians would just take them out and throw them out. So like said the librarian. So like, but hiding in the history section, I found a book called Ritual Magic by E.M. Butler, which is like a survey of grimoire magic. And it includes large excerpts from like a lot of grimoires. And it was not until like, so I found that book, let me think, when I was a junior in high school, so 1994. And I discovered that E.M. Butler is Eliza Marion Butler, that like that book was written by a woman. I found out like 15 years later. And it was like a revelation to me because I'd been doing grimoire magic pretty seriously for those 15 years and had yet to meet another woman doing serious grimoire magic. So like, that's what I'm saying. So like men or women pretending to be men, or like low-key 100%. Pretending. Like a lot, I mean, she wasn't like pretending to be a guy, but she definitely put E.M. Butler, and you and I both know why she did that. Because again, 100%. Like even now, and that book's old. I mean, that book came out in probably like 1940 or something. But even now, when at the beginning of my career, I got recommended. Like, I'm not saying pressured, but it was recommended to me to not use my very femme first name on a book.
Yeah. And I had that same,
so actually still a real thing.
It is. And I had that same consideration. No one recommended it. It was just sort of in the milieu of suggestions. And I decided to go with my baptismal name, and people can just deal with it. But yeah, that's definitely a recommendation. And we also look at the work of women in the art world and their artistic contributions. I'm thinking Ethel Colquhoun, for example, Frida Lady Harris. And this just, when we talk about, for example, even like tarot decks, when we say the Thoth deck, it's Aleister Crowley's tarot deck, when in reality, it's not.
Right.
It's Frida Lady Harris's deck she created with the help of Aleister Crowley. She paid him a stipend to make this tarot deck. So the vision was hers, the art is hers. And why isn't it Frida Lady Harris's deck? And I think it comes back to this conscious or subconscious devaluation of women, which I think is something as occultists we need to work at unpacking and being like, hey, whoa, am I subconsciously thinking less of a woman's work?
Which I will say I definitely did early in my career. Like I definitely got into ceremonial magic because it was like boy magic and therefore respectable. Unlike Wicca, which was like girl magic and therefore inferior. Like, I don't know that I would have said that out loud. Or I don't think I knew I was doing that, is really what I'm saying. But I was definitely doing. I mean, I got a graduate degree in mathematics out of internalized misogyny. Like, I got a graduate degree in mathematics to prove I was as smart as a boy. So like it went deep in me, right? So like I get it, but or yeah, no, 100%. Or like, you know, you were talking about Thoth deck, but like the Rider Waite deck.
Yes.
That one drives me nuts. Like Rider, that's the publisher. He didn't do fucking anything. All he did was put some money on the table. And like, I don't want to diminish Waite's contribution, but that is Pixie Smith's deck.
100%.
And like, at least the Thoth deck, we don't always call it the Crowley deck. You know what I mean? But like Rider Waite, like, no, that is the Smith Rider Waite.
Yes. Deck. Yes. You know, and 100%.
Like, that one in particular, I find. FYI, if anybody listening to this doesn't know who Pixie Smith is, her full name's Pamela Coleman Smith. Like, read up on her because she's actually amazing. She is cool. She was a set and costume designer in the theater. She was really, really which by the way is like a revelation in reading her tarot. So here's the thing I recently learned about that Smith Rider Waite tarot, which I don't have one handy. But like for people who know the tarot, like you know how it has those really low horizons? It's because there's stages, and that's like the backdrop. What? And if you line the horizon, like if you put down like 6 cards and line up the horizon line as if it's the backdrop of a stage, you get a very clear like foreground, middle ground, background, and then stage backdrop, which blew my mind. But like when you know that like she's like her art started as like being a set designer for the theater.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like next time you read with that deck, try that, and it's mind.
That is so cool. I love that. Yeah. And I mean, I can say that the same thing about the Thoth deck. You will, when you explore Frida Lady Harris's art and realize her vision for the deck was one of forward thinking, embracing the Aeon of Horus, and she intentionally included lines of movement and scientific concepts woven throughout the deck, and you see this in a lot of her artwork. It gives a richness to understanding that, and I think a lot of us, at least most of us, I would be optimistic to say, when we end up in the occult witchcraft milieu, we like to, like I said, like to think of ourselves as more, perhaps done some more personal work than someone who just sticks with the same thing their whole life and whatever their parents did, I'm going to do. But I think
I wish that was true.
I was about to say, I wish it was true. And it's okay to have that realization when you ask yourself, what are your favorite female magicians? What are your favorite female occultists, your favorite witches? And if your answer is coming up blank, don't be ashamed to be like, oh, that's an invitation. Treat a lack of knowledge as an invitation to learn more and go further, because there is some incredibly inspiring women, not only in history, but happening right now. I'm talking to one of them.
I am also talking to one of them.
Oh, thank you. You know, my mind was blown. See, I have all these books I want to pull up behind my head, and I just know it's going to take too much time, but I was so blown away to learn about the work of Ethel Colquhoun in Sex Magic and her Sex Magic diagrams, and Amy Hale's recent book. And that's just one example of so many cool things happening. And I think we are seeing an academic resurgence of interest of female occultists and magicians over time and witches. And I would love to see that same energy bleed over to the practitioner community as well. And so for my charge of action, that's my charge of action, is ask yourself, am I learning about, do I know about the contributions of women and marginalized people as well? And if the answer
that's what I was going to say, like not just women, people of color, people who are not Western European, like from all these things, especially, and like I'm just going to say Solomonic magic in particular has this reputation of being magic done by white Christian men. But like that's actually because you only read about the kinds done by white Christian men. Like there's a ton of Jewish Solomonic magic, there's a ton of Arabic Solomonic magic, there's a huge kind of like relatively new like Afro-Caribbean diaspora Solomonic magic. Like
that's cool.
Those are all, and also like FYI, Solomon was neither white nor Christian. Like I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah, and something that I found very true is when I'm exploring different perspectives, different people, different practices, of course, in a way that's humbled and invitation. Like I'm not talking about appropriation here, just to be very clear. But when I'm exploring people's different perspectives and really listening and really participating, it really enriches my own worldview and my own practice, even if it's something I don't necessarily believe or subscribe to. But to take a step back and realize the profound truth and meaning and beauty in the work and words of other people. And
Mm-hmm.
your world will be so much bigger if you
Yeah.
open it up to this broad range of perspectives and history. And it's so
Yeah.
worth your while.
100% agree. Amen.
Amen. So mote it be. So I have kept you a really long time. Thank
That's
you
true.
so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you for
Um,
having me. I enjoyed
yeah.
it.
And just to wrap this up, is there any other points you'd like to re-emphasize or bring right back up near the end here?
I'm gonna reiterate what we said, that like get a co-magician as soon as you can. Like read and listen and I'm gonna say read because I'm old, but I also mean like podcasts and what videos and whatever. Like experience as broad a variety of viewpoints as you can. And like in both co-magicians and even more so in just like consuming other people's ideas, like you don't have to agree with somebody to get something valuable out of their work. Like even people
100%.
I rabidly disagree with, like sometimes say things and I'm like, oh, that was pretty smart though.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
they're a
same
terrible
here.
human being, but like, oh, that one thing, that was pretty smart. I'm gonna take that part. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would say that is like the biggest takeaway for people. And also like again, like things are getting better for women, but like for people listening, like please do go out of your way to like if you make a list of the 10 teachers you have and they're all white dudes, like maybe think about adding some people to that mix to get some
Yeah.
other viewpoints. And similarly, if they're all Thelemites, if they're all Catholic magicians, like if you're only reading like one specific niche on kind of any metric, just like read some more stuff. And also don't just read magic, right? Like read some science and some history and like other
Yes. All
learn
of
to
that
cook,
good stuff.
learn to
Yeah.
garden, all of those things.
Yeah, and I guess the thing I want to reiterate too is don't allow both your personal practice and whatever intellectual exploratory journey you're currently on to be another source of shame and guilt and a metric to beat yourself up over. View your lack of knowledge as an invitation to learn more and make your world so much more beautiful and brighter by including others and learning. And yeah, and of course, this podcast is a part of that, right? We had a very frank,
Exactly.
honest conversation about ourselves and magic, which I think is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I had so
Oh,
much
thank
fun.
you.
Yeah.
And as always, check out the links below,
Yeah.
um, all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
thank you so much to
Thank you
all
so
of
much.
our.
And we spent so much time talking about like local in-person stuff. So again, like if you're in
Yes.
Pittsburgh, like I will definitely set up a dinner with me and other magicians where you can meet a bunch of people. Like just send me an
Yeah.
email and I will make that happen. Similarly, if you want to see me live, Cromwell, Connecticut, Changing Times, Changing Worlds, Halloween weekend is my next
Woohoo.
time when people who aren't in Pittsburgh can see me somewhere.
And I hear great things about that as well. So
I quite
definitely
like
worth
that
checking out.
convention. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good one.
Yeah, and likewise with me, if you're interested in Raleigh, North Carolina,
Yeah.
upcoming, we have ThelemaCon, which is open to all people. It's not associated officially with any particular order. And come see some cool speakers. I am not one of the speakers, but I am a volunteer because I love seeing cool people do their thing. So check
Awesome.
out ThelemaCon, check out my stuff. I do a lot of in-person, I do more in-person stuff than online. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. So as always, I'm the center of
Bye,
expression
everybody.
for the primal will to good, and so are you. Thanks.
Bye.